Greg Lake was 12 years old when he sat down with a battered one-string guitar at a friend's house and stumbled across a song that would outlast decades, multiple bands, and an entire genre's meteoric rise and fall. In a world where the mythology of rock music often feels heavy with tales of sweat-drenched sessions, tortured artistry, and lightning-strike moments of inspiration, the story of Lucky Man stands apart in its unassuming charm.
Ooh, what a lucky man he was.
It wasn't written by a brooding genius holed up in a cabin for months on end. No, it was written by a kid who had just learned 4 chords. A medieval fantasy set to music, no less. Lake would later admit that he wrote it when he was 12 years old and referred to it as a kid's song.
The first 4 chords I learned were D, A minor, E minor, and G. And with these 4 chords I wrote this little kid's song, really. It was really just a sort of medieval fantasy. I never wrote it down on paper, I just remembered it in my head.
At the time, there was no grand vision behind the song, no tortured existential musings or dramatic tales of heartbreak. The truth is much simpler, and therefore far more delightful. Lake wrote Lucky Man while playing around on that one-string guitar, and its lyrics, despite their seeming wisdom, came from the mind of a boy barely into his teens. You could almost hear the collective groan of modern songwriters, some of whom would later describe Lucky Man as a kind of impossible benchmark. Proof that sometimes genius doesn't require years of grinding toil. Sometimes it just appears out of nowhere, like an uninvited yet welcome guest.
What a lucky man he was.
Let's set the scene properly though, because it's not enough to simply say a 12-year-old wrote a hit song. That fact alone has already been retold so many times that it's practically rock lore at this point, but the backdrop of Lucky Man's emergence and its eventual reluctant recording is a saga as entertaining as the song is timeless. It's 1970. Greg Lake by this point was no longer a precocious teenager with a guitar and a dream. He was a fully fledged adult with a resume that already included membership in King Crimson, arguably the progenitor of progressive rock as a movement. But now, alongside keyboardist Keith Emerson and drummer Carl Palmer, Lake was part of a new project, one that promised to be even bigger, louder, and more ambitious. Emerson, Lake, and Palmer were forming not just a band, but a movement, one that many fans and critics alike would hold up as progressive rock's greatest success story. The problem, of course, was that even the best-laid plans can occasionally fall short of deadlines. During the production of their self-titled debut album, the band found themselves facing a dilemma that would be familiar to any musician with a recording contract. They were out of material. The label required a set amount of music to fill 2 vinyl sides, and they hadn't quite reached that magical number yet. With time running short and inspiration running dry, Lake piped up with an idea, a modest suggestion if you will. He offered them an old thing he wrote years ago, calling it just a little song. The idea might have been modest, but Keith Emerson's response was anything but. A man who embodied the grandiose spirit of prog rock, Emerson had little patience for something as straightforward as an acoustic guitar ballad. He told Lake to record it on his own, announcing that he was going to the pub.
So I said, well look, if there's nothing else, I've got this little folk song I wrote when I was a kid. So Keith said, okay then, why don't you play it? Let's have a listen. So I played it, and but no one liked it. And so I said, well look, the thing is what are we going to do? Because we're 1 track short and we've got nothing else. So Keith said, well I'll tell you what, why don't you record it on your own and I'll go down the pub.
With that, Emerson left Lake and Carl Palmer behind to work on the song without him. One can only imagine the mood in the studio that day, a mix of mild indignation and stubborn determination on Lake's part, perhaps tinged with a touch of, I'll show him. Show him he did. Over the course of what must have been a surreal few hours, Lake and Palmer began building Lucky Man from the ground up. It started, as so many great songs do, with the basics, acoustic guitar and drums. But the 2 musicians weren't content to leave it at that. With each new take, they added layers to the track, bass, harmonies, electric guitars. What began as a simple ditty began to grow in complexity, and while it still retained the sweetness of its origins, it began to feel more like something that belonged on a progressive rock album. Even then, it wasn't quite finished. By the time Emerson returned from his jaunt at the pub, the song was nearly complete, but it lacked a certain spark, something to make it truly stand out. Emerson, reluctantly at first, agreed to contribute, and what followed was one of the most iconic moments in the history of the genre. Using a Moog synthesizer, a relatively new piece of technology at the time, Emerson improvised a solo for the track's outro. The result was stunning, ethereal, otherworldly, and completely unlike anything most listeners had heard before. It elevated the song from a pleasant acoustic ballad to something truly transcendent. Emerson may not have liked the song initially, but there's no denying that his contribution was the finishing touch that helped Lucky Man become a classic.
And eventually Keith came back from the pub, and he came into the studio, and we played it, and he was really shocked when he heard it. And he said, wow, I think I'd better play on that. And so I said, okay. So the thing is, I said, I've already done the solo, so the only place really that's left is if you put something on the end. So he said, well, let's run the track and I'll experiment and see how it goes. And because he was only experimenting, I actually put the speakers on dim. And Eddie Offord, the engineer, and I were sort of talking as he was experimenting. When it got to the end of the track, I said to Eddie, was it me or did that sound good? And Eddie said, I think it sounded good. Let's play it back. So we played it back, and that is the solo that's on the album. And so I called Keith on the talk back, and I said, you know, Keith, you really should come and hear this. It's a wonderful solo. And he said, no, I could do a much better one. I said, really? I don't think you could. You know, perhaps you would like to just come and hear it. After a lot of persuasion, he came in, and of course, once he heard it in context, that was it. It was game, set, and match.
What's most remarkable about Lucky Man isn't just the story of its creation, it's the song's enduring appeal.
And feathers, they made up his bed.
Released as a single in 1970, it quickly became a hit, charting in both the United States and Canada. For a track that had been, let's face it, something of an afterthought during the album's production, it went on to become one of the band's signature songs. Fans loved it, radio stations played it on repeat, and even the critics, who could be notoriously harsh when it came to progressive rock, had to admit that there was something undeniably charming about it.
What a lucky man he was.
Lake himself seemed both bemused and proud of the song's success. He reflected that it was funny how something so innocent, so simple, could become something that people remember him for. And simple it is, at least by the standards of the genre, where so much of progressive rock is defined by its complexity, its shifting time signatures, extended instrumental solos, and elaborate concept albums. Lucky Man is almost defiantly straightforward. Its lyrics tell a simple story, its melody is easy to follow, and its structure is refreshingly uncluttered. Yet perhaps that's precisely why it has endured. In a genre that can sometimes feel overly intricate, Lucky Man is a breath of fresh air.
Ooh, what a lucky man he was.
A reminder that sometimes less really is more. Of course, the song's simplicity belies the skill involved in its execution. Lake's vocals are as smooth and evocative as ever, conveying a sense of wistfulness that perfectly suits the lyrics. Palmer's drumming is understated but effective, providing a steady foundation for the track. And then there's Emerson's Moog solo, a moment of pure genius that manages to feel both spontaneous and perfectly placed. Together, these elements create a song that feels timeless, as relevant today as it was over 50 years ago. Even now, decades after its release, Lucky Man continues to find new audiences. It's been featured in films and TV shows, covered by countless artists, and performed by Lake himself during his solo tours. Each time it's played, it serves as a reminder of the power of music to transcend time and space. And each time it's heard, It's a testament to the extraordinary talent of a 12-year-old boy who just wanted to learn a few chords on his guitar.
What a lucky man he was.
In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson of Lucky Man is this: inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. Whether it's a one-string guitar at a friend's house, a moment of desperation in the studio, or a synthesizer solo improvised at the last minute, the magic of music lies in its ability to surprise us. And if Greg Lake's story teaches us anything, it's that sometimes the best songs are the ones that happen almost by accident. They're not overthought, overwrought, or overproduced. They're just lucky.